here with the 8th program in Series 3 of the Sewing Connection. A viewer wrote to say she liked the idea of appliquing on clothing or other items, but it always came out looking very childlike, and that wasn't her intent. Fact of the matter is, appliques are just great on children's clothing or in children's rooms. But to add a little sophistication to a very simple theme, distort the facts. For example, this little fish down on the table has been appliqued to what's going to be a child's t-shirt. So there I've got the fish and the wiggly eyes, and be sure that they can't come off if a small child's going to wear them. And little heart bubbles coming up and some neat decorative stitches you can do on your machine. Naturally, this is childlike. It's for a child. But taking the same idea, a fish, how can we distort the facts on that? Here's how. Here's my original fish down here on this paper, and I'm going to simplify it a lot. Anybody can do this. You don't have to be an artist. These things I'm going to show are for non-artists. So it's just a matter of drawing a little curvy line one way and a little curvy line the other way, and you have a fish. Close up the tail. And if I would further draw some little lines that make it maybe a little unfish-like, but make it kind of interesting, like this. And then if I would trace all that on a piece of that fusible web, the transfer sheet, I'll make these lines a little bit darker here, but if I would get all that traced the same way, very, very simply, and then just fuse it to a piece of fabric, let's see what can result with this. So I'll get this all fused down. You can do this either with an iron or on a press. I'll do it both ways just to show you it works both ways very easily. And I had this all drawn on the rough side, the fusible side of this, so I can see through. I'm not sure that you can. This fabric that I'm cutting up here is something that I wore on an earlier show in this series. It was a suit with big abstract tulips. They weren't abstract, they were just tapestry tulips. But it occurred to me that the back side of this fabric had a very fishy look, and so it might do very nicely in a fishy theme. So here's my simplified fish, and I'm actually just going to tear this backing off because it's easier to tear when it's like this. Or you can go ahead and cut all those lines. I'm tearing it off though, because can you see? Those lines kind of came off the paper and they stayed on my fish. So with those lines on the fish, I would cut out the different pieces and put it on the fabric that I have over here on the press, and I'd have to transpose all that to do it backwards. So let's get it down here and let's get it going. So here's the idea. I am possibly not going to do the same thing or the whole thing, but I'll do a little bit of it so that you can see how it all comes about. Anyway, you just keep placing them, and as I'm doing this, as I'm taking them apart, I'm stretching it out longer. Instead of the size fish it was, it would come out a big long one, probably longer than this piece of fabric I have. So anyway, this is the idea. No artistic ability at all for this. It's just something anybody can do very simply. So you spread all these pieces out, and by the time you get them all fused in place, just amazing what results for no talent whatsoever. I am really not an artist, but I do things like this frequently, and then when I wear them, people exclaim about, oh, how terrific this or that is, and it's kind of fun since you know that, gee, there was nothing involved. Now what I've done here is lose my place so that I'm not sure exactly how these go. What that says to you is that you better pay attention to what you're doing and not be looking up and down. But anyway, I'll just put the rest of it down here to give you the idea. This fish is going to curve around in funny ways. But anyway, by the time we have all the pieces placed in place wherever they are and put the press down, it would make a kind of an interesting picture, and it doesn't look like this doesn't look like a fish at all, perhaps by now, but it doesn't look like the original fish. I'll give it a little shot of steam and just let it steam a minute until it beeps. But when that's all finished, once it's steamed, once it's pressed in place, you come out looking something like this. This poor fish really got the hook. He doesn't look too wonderful since I didn't cut him apart and completely put him out. But here I've done the same thing on a sweater with a combination of ultra suede, and just put this on a sweater. I didn't make the sweater, it's a stock sweater I had, but you can see that no longer looks like the little childlike fish. So distorting the facts is what adds a little sophistication to this. Another example that I have is this one that's hanging in back of the fish, and I'll just move this back here. Okay, this is another standard sweater that I had, a cardigan in this case, and the discordant colors add a little sophistication too. If you put the clashy, the resonant colors that reverberate off each other as these do, it's a combination of rosies and orangey reds and down into fuchsias and purples. It gives a little more sophisticated look perhaps. So first I started by making this willow branch on the machine, and this is a matter of couching it on. So I'm doing it with a different color thread so you can see what it looks like. But it's simply couching it on any fabric, sweater in that case. It could be on a wall hanging, whatever is your intent. And I'm using a blind hem stitch here, the one that goes several stitches straight and then goes over, zigzags over and comes back again, is what I'm using to couch this on. And once it's on, then we can get some leaves on that, some willow leaves. Well, my first attempt was like this. I started drawing willow leaves, just very simple ones, and then it occurred to me that's not the best way to do it. It would really be much more sensible if I would save suede or whatever fabric I'm working with, if I'd run them all together. So here was my more sensible attempt. Same willow leaves, but because they're the same at both ends, it's very simple to add just leaves here and there, and I probably can't do this because it doesn't write very easily. Yes, it is. It's writing on this paper, but this is how. You can see how simple it is to add these willow leaves. And nothing has to be cut out between each leaf. They just all run together. So then what you would do with this, I'll remove a little bit of it that I didn't use. What you would do with this is press it. And I'm pressing this on the wrong side, the suede side of a leather-like fabric, so that we have a little interesting contrast of textures when we finish up. I'll just cut out a few of these and show you what they look like. So here it is, and the easy way to cut these, in fact, is just cut one wavy line and then cut them apart perhaps, so it makes a really quick job. And after you have a bunch of these leaves cut out, you arrange them on your willow branch and get them fused in place. And then depending on what the fabric is that you're using in the background, you possibly can just stitch them on, or maybe instead straight stitch them on, or maybe instead you're going to need to, on this, satin stitch them if it's a ravelly fabric. This one wrinkled a little bit, so I'll give it a slight press while I cut out another leaf or two. And then we'll peel off the backing and put them on. Now this is just arranging them however the arrangement appeals to you. I'll put it up here. And isn't this simple? Really, non-artist. Everybody can do it. So you arrange these so that they kind of are coming off that. Now what you maybe can't see too well is the fact that this is a combination of shiny and dull, but the interesting texture combination also gives a little look of sophistication to it instead of being too blatantly obvious. So I'll just put a few of them on here and then go ahead and fuse it so you can see what it looks like. This could, though, as I said, be done just as well on the iron, so it's whichever you have a preference for. I'm ripping the paper a little bit to get it off more easily. A great deal of static in this paper, so it wants to cling to my hand. I'll just let it. And I'll go ahead and put that down. And I could always add some more to it later. I think it's fused without letting it whistle. But it makes a little interesting contrast of textures here, as you can see. The fact that those leaves are shiny and the background is the dull suede look. And so, very quick, very easy, something everybody can do very nicely. I made several rows here on the sweater, and this really just took minutes to cut out and fuse all of these leaves in place on the sweater. What did take a few more minutes then is to stitch them. And I didn't stitch all around these. They are fused in place. They're going to stay, even if I put this through the Well, I won't. On this sweater, I'll hand wash it and spread it out to dry. But what I did then to stitch it on is not stitch all the way around the edge. That would make it harder. I just have one little vein, the way a vein of a leaf would be, right down the center of each leaf. So that made it very quick to stitch it on in place. Even though some of this is out in the sleeve, it's still just as easy. To get even more or even easier for some of you non-artists to do, think about an abstraction of that same thing. Instead of having something that looks completely natural, you could do something that is just completely abstract. Here's another sweater. I seem to have an abundance of purple sweaters, so they're all getting embellished today, or a good bunch of them are. So I'm putting this one on the press, and what I have here is just a bunch of these pieces of suede, and they are all in those discordant colors, the reds and the oranges and the fuchsias and purples, all mingled together because it does make an interesting combination. And I do have a fusible on the back of all this. There's a fusible web, but I've already peeled the paper off most of these pieces. Here's the paper still on this, and I left it there because I might cut this one up and make different stripes, different sizes. What I'm going to do with this is just build a picture. It may or may not be wonderful. I suspect it won't be wonderful, but everybody can do something of this sort. I'll put one not quite down the middle, but a little off center, and I'd put some going different ways, maybe one over here, and just kind of build on this. Play around with it until you get what you consider a really interesting arrangement. Weave them in and out perhaps, do whatever pleases you. Give a little square over here. Put a little accent up near the face. Here I'll put another one down this way and maybe weave it under this. Another one over here perhaps. But you get the idea. You can arrange these in whatever way you like. They don't have to be wonderful. They don't have to be anything artistic. Everybody can do this. You simply place them. And there isn't really too much there. This isn't great, but it isn't all that bad. And so I might just put the press right down on it if I want to. But what this was here to remind me of, I drew some straight lines across that, is because sometimes it's interesting to just have a whole lot of shapes to repeat themselves somewhere. If, for instance, I cut a few pieces down here in increasing sizes as each one goes down, let's just fuse the whole thing and see what it looks like. And if it doesn't come out right, it was a throwaway sweater anyway. I haven't lost anything. But if it does come out to be something fun, then terrific. Instead of throwing it away, you go ahead and wear it. So I'll get these all straight. Everything is sort of either perpendicular or parallel to each other. But you're the artist. You do as you please on this. So we'll just put the top down and give it a little fusing and see what happens. I'll give it a shot. Whoops, I didn't close it all the way. There with a shot of steam, and we'll just wait for it to beep to tell us it's finished, and then pick it up and see what we have. So, wasn't maybe too bad, just to place it there and do such a quick job. Okay, after this, had I looked at it more carefully, but I really did do that in, what, half a minute? Had I done it more carefully, it would have come out looking a little bit nicer than this. Now, even though we're putting these on sweaters, finished projects, you still can sew them on very easily, whether it's a satin stitch or whether it's going to be just a straight stitch. It still is not at all a problem to sew them on because we can work ourselves down into the sleeves. I'm going to show you another one here that would be easy to work with. And this one was another sweater that I put some of those same purpley, pinky blue colors on, and I stitched some of them down. Somewhere I did not stitch it down. It doesn't matter whether I've stitched or not. What I'm going to do is just come down into the sleeve here to show you how it can be manipulated quite easily on your machine. So now this is just straight stitch because this is a suede fabric, so there's not going to be any raveling, so it's not a problem. Therefore, we'll get a little stitching in here. I'm going to go down in the sleeve where you think, oh, but you can't do that. Those of you who bought a free arm machine just so that you could do this, it doesn't work that way unless you go that direction. I'm not. I'm having to use mine going this way, so the free arm doesn't help me. If you have a flatbed machine, that's all right too. So here I'm going to be doing a little stitching on this. And as I get down into the sleeve, it's just a matter of stopping and manipulating it whenever I need to. I'm going to make rather large stitches on this because, frankly, I'm in a contrasting color so that you can see it. And I'll probably take these stitches out and put it in the right color later. Therefore, they're large, but you can see that every time you need to, you just manipulate your sweater, and you can get way down into a small wrist by doing this if you just keep manipulating it as you move along. Now, in the body of the sweater, where you're more likely to put all this decor than on the sleeve, it's going to be easier still when you don't have to work down into it. But you can see this is not difficult. You can get down into that, way down to the wrist. I have the needle in the down position, and do remember to do that so that every time you stop and readjust everything on the machine, that it will hold your fabric in place so that it won't come up and move on you. Anyway, I'm almost at the wrist, so you can see it is possible. You can do that without a whole lot of trouble. So let me cut this off and we'll move on to something else. Isn't this kind of fun? Now this is really an abstraction of that abstract that I did, I guess, because I have simplified this so much from, first of all, using pretty much the same colors from the willow leaves on the sweater hanging up to the abstract sweater that I have down here to merely stripes. So very simple stripes here. And stripes are an easy type design to work with. Everyone can do that. And I did work here around the design that's already in the sweater. There were some cable knit stripes going down here, so I've kind of bordered those cables as I put these suede stripes on, because for a non-artist this is an easy way to do it. Work with what you have, and whatever is indicated down here, then perhaps go with it and do something simple because of what you see there. Besides going from more complicated kind of nature signs there, or nature patterns, designs. Besides going from them into the more abstract and into the simple, and besides simplifying that fish to something very simple until it's almost unrecognizable as a fish, you might do something different with textures. Now I did here with these willow leaves, as I was putting the leather and suede together, the shiny and the dull together. Here is sort of a combination that makes it a little bit more interesting, maybe a little more sophisticated than, for instance, putting black leaves on a red sweater. Anything that blatant is probably not as easy to wear as something that's a little more subtle like this. And it would just be a little bit simpler to do this. Now these aren't really going to ravel either, so this could be straight stitched on. But if you did have this in a fabric that was ravelly, let's just put it on a satin stitch here and see what happens. See if that works out nicely. Now you are going to see this very definitely because I'm doing this satin stitch with the wrong foot. I should have one that has a groove underneath for a satin stitch, and I just realized I do not. I have one that's flat on the bottom, so that's why I'm kind of helping it along here. But a satin stitch for any ravelly fabric will hold it down very well, and then it can be either dry cleaned or washed. Either one would work beautifully. In fact, with any of those designs that I do in suedes, I very likely, if I'm in a hurry to wear it, I just might go ahead and wear it a time or two, and then when it needs to be washed, I might then go ahead and do the stitching rather than in advance. Just if I'm a little impatient to get it all done. Okay, we have this leaf done. So there we are. We'll cut off the threads and you can see we've got a willow leaf. Here again, it would be prettier done maybe in a shiny thread of a similar hue instead of in a white, a complete contrast this way. So think it through, try it out on scraps, as I always say to do, before you actually put it on garments. Another interesting type combination is to combine patterned fabrics. Here I have a very childlike theme on these pillows, and yet even though this little raccoon that I have there on the 3 different pillows, even though it's very childish, it's for children's rooms is why it is, but despite that, the fact that it's in a whole lot of different prints makes it a little bit more interesting instead of having just plain solid colors. And even though all 3 of those are exactly the same because they are done in different prints and different colors, they look a whole lot different. So here you can combine stripes and little prints and large prints, anything imaginable. It all works out beautifully as long as you stay in the same color families here. You don't have to worry about having an artist's sense of color. It looks just fine if you will stay in the same color family, keep all the fabrics very similar, very much related, and it works out very well. These buttons, by the way, are very, very securely stitched on by machine, so they cannot be pulled off. Make sure that, once again, anytime you work with children's things that they're going to play with or wear or whatever it is. So a combination of patterns, of designs in the fabric might be another type distortion that you do in that it makes a more interesting design. So there is another one. Here's a combination of textures, and I think when we have this facing the camera, you can see, because of the way the light hits it, that it makes kind of an interesting thing. What I have done here with these tulips is, this is all the same piece of fabric. Those stems are in a different color, they're purple stems, but the tulips in the background are the same piece of ultra suede, but what's different is that I have cut the tulips upside down. So right now you are probably seeing it with a lighter background and darker tulips. If I'd turn it around, you'd see the reverse. You'd see lighter tulips and darker background, I think, if that's the way the light's hitting it right now. But it makes an interesting picture also. So think of doing something like this. Last segment, I did something about altering ultra suede. This is kind of the idea. If you have the same color, you might, if you're altering it, letting some seams out, do some sort of a picture like this on it so that you can cover up and enlarge it somewhat. Well, here's really an abstraction. What you see over here is simply a circle. I'll move some of these things out of the way here. So with this circle that I have, and where I got my circle was from a little paper plate, China paper, doesn't really matter, whatever you have that's round if you don't want to bother to draw a circle, and if you don't want to find any devices to do it, just get a plate. So I've drawn a circle with a plate, and where I would draw this circle is on some of the fusible web, the transfer sheet, the pull-off paper. I would draw around that so that I'd have my circle. And then after you have that circle done, think of what you can do that makes it interesting so it doesn't look just like a circle, because I doubt that on a sweater or on a t-shirt you want to just plunk a circle right in the middle of it. You'd probably rather do something a little more interesting. So here's how we can get slightly more interesting with this circle. We can draw lines in it, maybe get a ruler or whatever and draw nice straight lines all across it. Straighter ones than I'm doing these kind of quickly here, but draw a whole lot of lines. And then an interesting design that you can make out of this circle by just cutting this all apart and arranging it on your fabric. Here's the original, just circles. That's not too interesting, as you can see. Just a circle doesn't do much for you. But if you would cut that circle up the way I had all those little lines drawn and arrange them in a different way on your fabric like this, it would make a lot more interesting look of that circle. You could do the same thing not only with the circle, but possibly with any simple shape. Take a heart or a little animal or whatever and cut them up all in different ways like that and arrange them. A distortion like that makes such an interesting little difference, a little combination. If besides having that circle, if I would just shave off a little bit of the outline of it as I have here, this makes kind of an interesting idea also. Let's turn this circle into a ball, and let's say it's basketball season, so we needed some hoops around it. So here we have hoops as we have these semicircles going around it, and it's much more interesting than that basic circle in the first place. Or if it's getting into the right season, Then let's say we are going to do a little golfing. So here I have the same circle. All I have done is taken a paper punch and punched a bunch of holes in it so that it looks sort of like the dimples in a golf ball. But also, this is more interesting than just that basic circle. By putting a little depth in it like this, by putting a little more interest in, we have something that might be kind of fun. Or moving around the year, what comes after golf is probably baseball season comes next. Spring practice and golf begin, I guess, about at the same time. But what I've done here with this ball is add to it some bats. If it's going to be baseball season, we have to have a bat to go with the ball. So I've drawn some different size bats here. By the time all these were cut out and placed on this fabric, it makes quite a difference from the original circle. And just arranging them different ways and then fusing them down in place, everyone can do this. It doesn't take any talent whatsoever. So, to promote a little bit of sophistication in appliques, go simple to complex, natural to abstract, print mixture to make less obvious, or a contrast of textures, but lend a little subtlety by distorting the facts. Another change that's sometimes needed is in adding a pattern piece that isn't there. Come join me next time, and for a jewel neck blouse, we'll create a collar.